Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and this is going to be my first deck tech of the new Legion expansion. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite archetypes since I've practically started playing in German combined arms. Legion has brought a lot to the deck, and I'm very excited for it and have been having a great deal of fun. One quick disclaimer before we jump into the deck. This was a deck built and played during the opening days of the expansion, and as such, it is impossible to tell how the meta is going to form and whether this deck has a place in it. If you are a new player or someone that is just limited in their wild cards or collection, I would wait to see if this is an actual deck or not. I have had a lot of fun with it, but I can totally see that this deck recedes into more of a fun deck rather than a serious competitive deck. And I don't want anybody spending their hard-earned elite wild cards or whatnot on a deck that ends up not working for them in a month or two. So if you have all the cards or you have no problems building this deck, go ahead. But if you're budget constrained, I would be careful crafting a lot for this deck. With that out of the way, let's jump right into the deck. And the first question is, what is Combined Arms? Combined Arms is a deck largely built around using the various unit types in order to empower certain cards. We want to be playing units from as many types as possible to power stuff like Combined Arms or Joint Operation, which are able to be really good buffs or really efficient removal and other cards that we'll talk about in a minute. It is overall, I think, a very fun archetype, and I would go to say this is a mid-range deck list. And what is mid-range? Mid-range is, in a very brief manner, the in-between between an aggro deck and a control deck. Essentially, we want to kill the enemy before the game drags really late into the game, but we are not trying to aggro them down and kill them on like turn 5 or 6. We are totally fine if the game goes into like turn 10, 11, 12. We're able to still perform very well and have strong tools and then wipe the enemy off and finish the game before the game, but we don't have infinite steam. We're not a control deck, so we play the in-between. And I would say this deck is also a very high-tempo deck list, which has so far worked quite well for the deck, in my opinion. And what is tempo? Tempo is something that has a lot of debate around it, and depending on who you ask, it can have different definitions. My definition of tempo is comparing your board space or your board condition against the enemy board. So, for example, my board having several units on it while the enemy has none means the tempo is in my favor. And cards that do something when they come down are high tempo, while those that don't aren't. An effect like Blitz or a deployment effect are high-tempo plays. However, a unit that does nothing, like the 104th Panzer Grenadier, is not exactly the highest of tempo play compared to something like the Albacore. And that's actually kind of a bad example because the 104th is really well statted, but, stuff like... let me see if I can find an example. Stuff like the Panzer 38 is not high tempo. The only thing you're doing to the board is getting a 2-3 out for 3 credits. You're not affecting the enemy's board in any way. You're just putting your own board out. So it's like average tempo. Compare that to something like the Nebula Warfare, which is a 2-2 artillery piece, but its deployment is potentially killing a 1 health enemy unit. That is high tempo, because if you can kill off an enemy unit and put out your own unit, that's really good. You've weakened their board and empowered your board. And that's what we mean by tempo. That's what I call tempo. And a lot of our units are going to be high in tempo. But without further ado, let's go right into a quick overview of the cards. So the Panzer 2C is our first thing. It is our 1 credit tank. This is very important for a card we'll talk about in a minute, but we need a 1 credit tank. And I think the 2C is one of the better options. Normally, people would probably run the Panzer 2A, but the Blitz actually doesn't have that much effect in this deck. There aren't a lot of times we don't have a tank on the board, and this Blitz is not that useful. because the only times the Blitz is useful is if we're playing that and combined arms. But usually if we have a big combined arms, we're going to have a tank on the board. So instead, I opt for a slightly slower card, but one that could potentially like power up like an artillery piece or a bomber and make them into more actual threats, which has great synergy in the deck. You could also try out the Humber. It's slower than the 2C in the mid-game, but that Fury means that combined arms is super scary with it, so could be an interesting option. And next up, combined arms. Combined arms is what the deck's named after and serves as a great way to enhance your threats. This deck has a lot of small, cheap units out on the board, and combined arms allows us to turn one of our small tanks into a very big and very scary tank. And this is very useful not only for applying a lot of pressure and dealing a lot of damage for cheap, but also by making it hard for the enemy to deal with our board. If we have, for example, 3 units on the board, let's say an infantry unit, an artillery piece, and a tank, maybe something like a carpet bombing might kill them all, or something like that. But with combined arms, we make that tank from like its 1-3, like if we take a Panzer 2-3, instead of being a 1-3, it's a 4-6. And now the carpet bombing doesn't kill that 4 attack tank, so it's going to get to attack over and over again. So it's very good at helping you to build very big units while also having a lot of units on the board, making it hard for the enemy to deal with everything. It's important to note we're not trying to save everything until we can play multiple combined arms and kill them. We want to play these on, like turn 4 and 5, and when we feel it's necessary to just apply extra pressure. I've even used combined arms just to build a unit that can trade with the enemy's units. Because this deck is very interested in building a board that is large and threatening and is able to kill the enemy, and combined arms just helps speed that up. It's not a primary win con. It's not something like counteroffensive where a deck is kind of built around it, We're not looking to build a massive combined arms. We're looking to build a very powerful board, and then using combined arms to make it even harder to deal with, and also add extra damage. Next up is Joint Operation. This is some of our only order-based removal. We have many units in the board, or in our deck, that have like deployment effects that can deal damage, or deployment effects that bounce enemy units, but sometimes we just need a very efficient ordered damage removal to get rid of some key unit, and this is where Joint Operation sits. It is very easy to make this 2 credits deal like 3 damage, or 2 credits deal 4 damage to a unit, and that is very, very powerful. This is able to get rid of like really annoying bombers or artillery, or help you trade out into big guards. Just a very effective card, and gives us a lot of flexibility and makes sure we always at least have some options to remove a must-kill threat. Moving on, we have the 104th Panzer Grenadier. This card seemed really strong and turned out to be really strong. At worst, it is a 2 credit 3/3, which is big enough that it's going to more than likely kill most enemy units and survive. It's very good at trading, and because of its deployment, which can get a 0 operation, it can also just be moving and attacking for free, which helps this deck immensely, as you're able to do stuff while also building more board. It is just like, I think, one of the best 2-drops out there, really, and it's very effective following up a turn 1 Panzer 2C. So a really good 2-drop. It's just effective in the entire game. 3/3 is not easy to remove, so it sticks around, and that can help give us the infantry we need for some of our buffs. Next up is the Albacore, the first British card. The Albacore is one of our high-tempo cards. The body itself is not that strong, although the 2C does make it a 2/2, which is very nice. But usually, this is here to help us ping off stuff or pin enemy units and have more bombers in the deck, as without the Albacores, we really wouldn't have any bombers in the deck. So this helps to fill a useful position. It's just a very effective overall card in the early game to disrupt the enemy and help you establish a better board. Next up is the Heinkel HE115. Has turned out to be, I think, a really, really good card. You essentially get for 3 credits, you are getting a 1/3 bomber that deals 1 to an enemy unit and then adds the spoils of war to your hand. That is the usual way I've been using it. Sometimes you just play it out on turn 2, but there's other times that you don't want to do that. But just having a cheap bomber that is able to instantly interact with enemy units and also gives you stuff to help draw through your deck. And notably, Spoils of War is very useful in this deck as we are very interested in being able to tutor specific cards. Targeted draw is much more useful than just straight out draw, although we're never going to say no to either. So Spoils of War is very useful at like finding, it can dig down and find that combined arms for the perfect turn, or it finds you like a key unit you need rather than just drawing you like the top card, which may or may not be useful. I think the HE is very, very good and works very well in adding an extra bomber to the deck. Then we get the Panzer 3L. I don't think there's much to say. This is a very big tank. It's meant to fit into combined arms. It's very often like a 5/5 or a 6/5 for 3 credits with Blitz. Just a really big 3-drop. Very, very good. Then we have East Surrey Regiment. East Surrey Regiment is a defensive tool, but is mainly here as a decent, cheap infantry. This deck doesn't have a lot of defensive options in it, so having some cheap guards can help us buy time against aggro decks. And this also just provides a very hard to remove infantry, which is great when we're looking to get combined arms off or just, enable some of our synergies. It's just overall a pretty effective unit. It's just a very efficient unit. And notably, we're running the 3 credit. This card is 3 credits, which in a minute will make more sense. Then we move on to the Panzer 38T. Ever since this buff, this card has just been like the little work engine of a lot of German decks. It's a decent body for 3 credits, and it draws us a card, meaning we don't lose out on too many cards. Overall, just really effective for the deck, especially for combined arms, as we're taking it kind of slow, and as such, we are able to really benefit from not having to lose a card out of our hand and still get a tank out. Just a really nice little 3-drop. Then we have the Nebula Warfare. Nebula Warfare is one of our primary cheap artillery pieces. It's very effective as it has that deployment effect that allows us to deal 1 damage to stuff, but is also a 2/2 artillery. It's overall just a very effective little artillery piece. Ping off, like 1 health units, or just help to soften stuff up, and put out another unit type that we otherwise wouldn't have. Very good. Then we have the Panzer 3H. The Panzer 3H is essentially the big version of the Panzer 38. It is a Spoils of War on top of a decent tank. This is our biggest tank in the deck at the moment, and it is pretty effective at that. It's low operation cost. It's able to dig us out the right card at the right moment. And it's relatively healthy, so it can stick around and then be buffed up with combined arms. Just another card that I think fits naturally well into the deck. Next up, we have the BF 109 E7 Trop, however you pronounce it. This is one of the biggest additions to the deck, I think. Previously, fighters for the deck were a very touchy subject. There just wasn't that many good fighters we wanted in the deck, and it really sucked. So being able to get a fighter that is very often just a 6/6 is really, really powerful. This unit, if you have a good curve, this coming down on turn 4 is just backbreaking, and it's a big reason why we have so many cheap tanks and infantry units. Because this just coming down on turn 4, turn 5 is so much extra pressure. It essentially has to be removed with hard removal, and is immune to board clears because of its stats. So it's a very effective card, and it's really, really strong in the mid game. Probably one of the highlight cards from Legions, and now one of the highlight cards from the Combined Arms deck, just kind of period. Then we have Blackwatch, which may seem a bit interesting because its stats are not good. It is a 1/6 for 5 credits. It does have guards, so it does stall, but the big thing is its deployment effect. Because we're a mid-range deck, we have time to play the game a bit slower, and Blackwatch is really, really useful in that. Being able to delay board clears or make the enemy pay a lot for removal, or even blanking certain win cons like research or the Commonwealth or other big expensive orders, is just really effective. And this just gives us... I've had games where the enemy is looking to set up a turn 7 carpet, and then Blackwatch comes down, and suddenly they don't have a play, and it gives me just that extra turn or two to kill them. It is just a very effective card, and one that I think is just really important for the deck. I think if you don't have Blackwatch in the deck, you actually will suffer a lot. I think it's a very effective tool to let us go into the mid and late game. Then we have the Yaga Bomber. Just a really effective fighter, bounces at a ground unit. It's a good body. Just overall a really, really good card. Not much to say. It was the first fighter that goes into the deck, and it will be the last one I take out if I remove any. Then we get to the late game, and we have carpet bombings. It took me a little while, and it took a lot of discussion to get to the carpet bombings, but this deck has a notable weakness of sometimes falling behind on the board, and it doesn't have a lot of recovery tools, and that's where carpet bombing comes in. Having ways to throw the enemy off their position and either just reset the board or turn it in your favor is just really, really useful. It doesn't add much to our strategy, but against aggressive decks, this can be backbreaking, as we can fight them tooth and nail, and then we wipe their board on turn 7 and are able to turn the board in our favor permanently. It has turned out to be very effective and just a very useful card. Then Gathering Storm, another card. This was my favorite card shown from Legions, and as such, and it turned out to be quite good. This is targeted draw and gives you a refill, and because of the way this deck is built, Gathering Storm is often giving you a good mix of card draw, removal, and high threat units. It's a very effective card, and it was, if we look at only the fighters, we either get a Yaga Bomber or a BF 109E7, and it just so happens that Gathering Storm draws an infantry and a tank to activate the BF 109. It has just turned out to be the thing that I think gives this deck a lot of staying power, well past when it would otherwise fall out. And I think it's a very effective thing. We don't run all 3 copies. I don't think we have enough units, and we ran out of rooms, so we only have the 2 copies. And then the final card, Leopold, Big Artillery piece, in the same idea as Carpet Bombing and Gathering Storm. Helps us to just fight much later than the deck otherwise would be able to. It's a full board reset with a Big Artillery. This card has just been always decent enough to see a lot of play, and it remains so here. And that is the deck list. So what are we looking for in the mulligan? When I usually mulligan, I'm often looking for the Panzer 2C and the 104th Panzer Grenadier. I think that is practically the strongest start. But otherwise, we are just looking to have a good curve. We are looking to play something on turn 1, play something on turn 2, play something on turn 3, and on and on and on. In general, you want to try to maintain your units, but don't be too... It takes time to find out the right balancing, and even I am still learning. But I generally find it's okay if Combined Arms is only giving +3/+3. It's okay if we're not maximizing the value of every single card every turn. Just develop. You just got to try to keep developing. Don't commit into board clears too hard. If you know the deck you're facing, you can plan around it. For example, if you're playing against a British deck, be ready for Carpet on turn 7. Maybe hold back that Nebula Warfare or that Panzer 38 until after it so you can refill and keep the pressure on. And there is a lot of room for experimentation, too. If you don't like a card in this list, feel free to try stuff out. Even let me know down in the comments. I've been looking at Flame Panzers to maybe replace the 38s if I need more anti-aggro. I've also been interested in trying out the Panzer IV F2. It's a strong late-game threat that helps us bounce guards and whatnot and really keep the pressure on. You know, stuff like that. And there's a lot more to try out. So that is it for today. The deck list is down in the comments, or down in the description, I mean. So if you're able to build this, try it out and see how it goes. I've been having a lot of fun with it, and it's just been one of my favorite decks. It plays in such a fun way. There's so much interactivity and so many decisions to be made. It's just a really enjoyable deck. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I have a lot of deck ideas coming out in the future. Look at this. We have all of these deck lists to try out. And many more that I haven't even built and tried out yet. So I'm very excited. How has Legions been going for you? I've been loving it so far. Even though it seems like maybe some of the old decks are sticking around, it has just expanded so many like otherwise weak archetypes, and I'm so excited. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.